Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we explore the fascinating and sometimes pretty unsettling edges of consciousness and reality.
Yeah.
Today, we're plunging into a particularly intriguing and kind of sprawling set of ideas known as the OZ factor.
And what's interesting right off the bat is that the OZ factor isn't really a single defined theory you can just point to. It's more like a cluster of interconnected beliefs.
Right.
And they all seem to center around the potential of altered states of consciousness.
Exactly. And we're not just talking about feeling a little, out of it.
You know.
The core idea here with the OZ factor is this notion that experiences like, say, psychedelic trips, near-death encounters, maybe even really profound meditation, could be more than just internal brain states. They might actually be gateways.
Doorways?
Gateways, yeah. That's the term you often hear. Gateways to other realities, or maybe offering a much deeper understanding of existence itself.
And then there's the conspiracy part.
Right, that's the kicker. Which suggests that powerful entities, governments, maybe others, they're aware of this potential.
And they're actively concealing it, or maybe even, exploiting it for their own purposes.
It does make you wonder straight away, though, why would people think these altered states are access points?
Instead of just like the brain doing weird things under unusual conditions.
Yeah, exactly. What's the spark for this whole gateway idea?
Okay, so let's unpack that. The foundation, that imagery, beyond the rainbow.
Straight out of The Wizard of Oz.
Exactly. It's not accidental. It represents that journey, right? To another realm, a place that seems magical, maybe full of hidden truths.
So proponents of this OZ factor idea, they believe these altered states aren't just neurological blips or, hallucinations.
They see them as genuine glimpses.
Glimpses into other dimensions, places that hold profound secrets about, well, everything. The universe, consciousness.
And crucially, secrets that somebody somewhere wants to keep under wraps.
Which immediately brings up the government angle?
Well, if you think about it, this idea of accessing other realities through mystical states, that's ancient, right? It's in shamanism, mysticism all over the world.
Sure.
But making that jump to a government conspiracy around it, that's where the OZ factor gets its specific flavor,
And that flavor often involves looking back at things like the CIA's MKUltra program.
Definitely.
I mean, the fact that the government was actively researching mind-altering substances, LSD and the like.
That's documented fact.
Right. And it's frequently cited by OZ factor proponents as, the early evidence, proof the government was interested in the potential of these states.
Yeah, and the OZ factor narrative kind of reinterprets that. It wasn't just about mind control or interrogation techniques.
Although that was definitely part of it.
Oh, for sure. But the theory suggests it might also have been an initial, maybe even crude, investigation into these potential gateways themselves.
Even if they didn't fully realize what they were stumbling onto.
Perhaps, or perhaps they did. It's interesting because the documented goals of encultura were focused on control, espionage, degrading enemies, practical stuff.
But the OZ factor lens sees that initial interest differently, like a first step, maybe accidental, towards understanding these other states.
Then you fast forward a bit, the 1960s, the psychedelic movement.
Right. Huge cultural shift.
In the OZ factor story, this wasn't just, peace, love, and rock and roll. It was seen as a widespread, kind of unintentional unlocking of these altered states. A whole chunk of the population suddenly getting access.
Wow, okay. So the counterculture was accidentally opening these doors on a massive scale.
That's the idea. And then the government crackdown, the war on drugs that followed.
Yeah.
From this perspective, that's viewed as a deliberate effort to slam those doors shut again, to suppress this potential that had just been revealed.
So it wasn't just about controlling drug use and social upheaval.
No, the theory adds this extra layer. It was also about controlling access to this other level of reality or understanding.
That definitely adds a significant conspiratorial dimension.
It does. And the theory doesn't just stay in the 60s. It suggests this thread continues.
How so?
Well, think about later government-funded research. Stuff into, say, remote viewing, ESP.
The Stargate project and things like that.
Exactly. That kind of thing is often seen by proponents as just a continuation of the same exploration.
But maybe more sophisticated, more covert.
Trying to harness altered states, perhaps more subtly, for intelligence gathering or other purposes.
It does raise that point about how people interpret research, especially in fringe areas.
Absolutely. Findings that are maybe ambiguous or debated in the scientific community can easily get slotted into a pre-existing conspiracy framework. It fits the narrative.
Right. And the modern version of the OZ factor theory, how does that look?
Well, it often suggests this research and manipulation is ongoing, but maybe using more advanced means?
Like what?
Could be advanced technologies we don't know about, specific pharmaceuticals maybe disguised as mental health treatments.
Or even, like, subliminal stuff. Hidden messages in media or entertainment.
Yeah, potentially. The narrative shifts from kind of clumsy experiments back in the day to possibly much more refined, subtle forms of influence now.
Okay, so let's talk about the evidence. And I'm using air quotes there because, as you said, it's not exactly peer-reviewed science.
Right. It's more a collection of interpreted experiences, patterns people see, anecdotal accounts.
So what kind of things do proponents point to?
Okay, one big one is the idea of shared hallucinations.
Shared? How so?
Well, people in altered states, particularly, say, under psychedelics, sometimes report seeing very similar things.
Like?
Really specific geometric patterns, for instance. Or encountering archetypal figures, tricksters, wise old men, mother goddesses, figures that seem to recur across different people, different cultures even. Sometimes people even describe interactions with entities that feel genuinely sentient, independent.
Okay.
And proponents argue that the consistency of these reports, the fact that different people see similar things, suggests they're not just making it up.
They argue it points to tapping into something real.
Yeah, like a shared reality that's usually hidden, or maybe something like Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious, a common symbolic realm.
What would a more conventional scientific perspective say about that?
Well, from a neurological angle, our brains are wired to recognize patterns. We have specific structures for processing visual information, for understanding social cues.
Okay.
So, under an altered state, when normal processing is disrupted, these inherent structures could potentially manifest in similar ways across different people.
Because our brains are fundamentally built alike.
Exactly. So you might get similar patterns or archetypal feelings without necessarily accessing some external shared reality. It could be an artifact of shared brain architecture.
Interesting. What else is cited as evidence?
Anomalous experiences. Things like near-death experiences, NDEs.
Right, people reporting leaving their bodies, seeing lights, meeting deceased relatives.
And out-of-body experiences, OBEs, more generally. Also, profound mystical visions, moments of cosmic insight.
And how do those fit in?
They're often cited as evidence that consciousness isn't purely locked inside the skull.
That it's not just limited to the physical body.
Precisely. And that we can, under certain circumstances, perceive or access other dimensions, other realms of existence.
Again, though, these are incredibly subjective experiences.
Absolutely. And while they can be utterly life-changing for the person involved.
You hear that all the time.
Yeah. But from a scientific view, they remain largely unexplained phenomena. There are various interpretations, neurological events triggered by brain stress, psychological factors.
Things happening when the brain is under extreme conditions, basically. Like oxygen deprivation and NDEs.
That's one hypothesis, yes, there are several, but no definitive scientific consensus proving access to another dimension.
Okay, what else is in the OZ factor evidence pile?
Symbolism in popular culture. This is a big one for interpretation.
How does that work?
Believers often look at books, movies, music, and they see references, hidden meanings.
Related to altered states.
Yeah, or hidden realities, or sometimes the whole OZ metaphor itself. They might interpret lyrics, plot lines, imagery as coded messages.
Hints dropped by people in the know.
Potentially, yeah. Or maybe just reflections of these archetypal ideas bubbling up. But proponents often lean towards intentional coding.
It really taps into that human desire to find patterns, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Seeking hidden layers, deeper meanings, especially in ambiguous stuff. It's a very human thing to do.
And then there are the government documents. Ultra again.
Yep. The declassified files related to MKUltra, Stargate, other similar projects, they get poured over constantly.
Looking for what, exactly?
Looking for any hint of a deeper agenda. Something beyond just mind control or remote viewing for spying.
Trying to find evidence that they were really interested in accessing these other realities, maybe?
That's the hope for some proponents. Find that smoking gun memo that says, we've confirmed access to Dimension X.
Which, presumably, hasn't turned up.
Not in any unambiguous way that satisfies mainstream science, but the very existence of these classified projects.
It fuels the suspicion.
Exactly. Government secrecy in sensitive areas inherently breeds suspicion. It creates space for interpretations about the real motives and outcomes.
Okay, one more piece you mentioned.
Personal stories. Testimonies.
Just people's accounts of their own experiences.
Yeah. Individuals who genuinely feel they had profound insights, met other beings, learned hidden knowledge during an altered state. They share their experiences.
And those become anecdotal support.
Right. They add to the body of stories that seem to point towards something more than just subjective experience.
But again, incredibly powerful for the individual.
Hugely powerful.
But from an outside analytical perspective, they remain subjective. They lack that objective, verifiable proof.
Correct. There's no way to independently confirm the hidden knowledge they might report gaining, for example.
Okay, so if this OZ factor is real, according to the theory, why suppress it and manipulate it? What are the alleged motives?
There are quite a few variations on this. One of the main ones is pretty straightforward: mind control and social control. The idea is, if people could easily access knowledge or perspectives that fundamentally challenge established power structures, well, that's a threat.
So keep people locked in the normal reality to maintain control.
That's one line of thinking. Or, conversely, maybe those in power want to use altered states for manipulation, to influence populations.
That ties back into the culture fears, I guess.
It does. It aligns with that common thread in many conspiracy theories, the fear of hidden control by elites.
What other motives are proposed?
Technological advancement is another one.
Meaning?
If these altered states genuinely provide access to new knowledge, maybe about physics, energy, consciousness itself, that knowledge could lead to massive breakthroughs, new technologies, new power sources.
And whoever controls that knowledge would have a huge advantage.
Exactly. So the motive would be to hoard that knowledge, keep it secret for strategic benefit, national security, economic dominance, whatever.
Okay, that makes a kind of cynical sense. Anything else?
There's also the idea of spiritual suppression. Well, perhaps established religions or other powerful institutions that rely on traditional doctrines and hierarchies.
Why would they suppress it?
Because direct personal spiritual experiences, the kind people might have in these altered states, could be seen as bypassing the need for intermediaries.
Like priests or gurus.
Right. It could threaten the authority of established spiritual systems if people felt they could access the divine or ultimate reality directly.
That's an interesting angle. The tension between organized religion and personal mysticism.
Yeah, it taps into some long-standing historical conflicts.
Are there any less negative interpretations of the motive?
There's a slightly more nuanced view you sometimes encounter, maybe even, dare I say, benevolent.
Really?
How? The idea that maybe some groups are exploring this OZ factor, not purely for control, but genuinely trying to unlock cosmic understanding.
To understand humanity's place in the universe, our potential.
Something like that. Perhaps even for the betterment of humanity, ultimately. But doing it in secret, maybe because they think the knowledge is too dangerous for widespread release yet, or needs careful management.
So, gatekeepers, but maybe with good intentions. Still secretive, though.
Still secretive, yes. It adds a layer of complexity, suggesting maybe not all alleged manipulation stems from purely dark motives, but still involves control.
Okay, we absolutely have to bring in the scientific perspective here. The counter-arguments.
Crucial.
Neuroscience has explanations for altered states, right?
Right.
Based on brain chemistry activity.
Absolutely. Science looks at measurable changes. We can see differences in brainwave patterns, alpha, theta, gamma waves changing during meditation or under psychedelics. We know specific neurochemicals, neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, glutamate. Their levels and interactions are dramatically altered by psychedelic drugs, for example.
And these changes correlate with the subjective experiences people report.
Strongly correlate, yes. Changes in serotonin receptor activity, particularly the 5-HT2A receptor, are heavily linked to the effects of classic psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin. Changes in brain network connectivity too, the default mode network getting disrupted, for example.
So science provides a biological framework. It's happening in the brain.
That's the scientific understanding, yes. based on neurochemistry, brain activity patterns, how our sensory perception gets modified.
Science also stresses how subjective these things are, right?
Hugely important point. What someone experiences in an altered state isn't just a passive reception of information, it's massively shaped by their mindset, their expectations.
Set and setting, as they say.
Exactly. Their personal beliefs, their cultural background, their personality, the environment they're in, it all profoundly influences the nature and content of the experience.
Which suggests it's maybe more about internal psychological and neurological processes.
Rather than a clear window onto some objective external reality, the mind itself is actively constructing the experience.
And the bottom line, scientifically speaking, is there evidence for accessing other realities?
The crucial point is, there is currently no conclusive, widely accepted scientific evidence to support the claim that altered states provide access to objective realities or hidden knowledge existing independently of the experiencing brain.
So the experiences feel incredibly real.
Undeniably real and often deeply meaningful to the individual.
But there's no scientific way currently to verify the information gained. Like if someone says they learned a secret physics equation in a trance.
There's no validated method to confirm that equation came from an external, non-physical source, rather than emerging from the complex workings of their own subconscious or imagination interacting with their existing knowledge.
Okay, and one last crucial point from the scientific or medical side.
Risks. We have to acknowledge potential risks
Associated with inducing these states.
Yes, particularly with substances like psychedelics, but even with intense meditation or breath work sometimes, there can be negative psychological consequences.
Like anxiety, paranoia, psychotic breaks in vulnerable individuals.
Precisely. Bad trips, prolonged difficulties integrating the experience, potential for psychological harm. It underscores the need for caution, responsibility, harm reduction, and understanding the risks involved.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the OZ factor conspiracy theory, as we've kind of picked apart.
Yeah.
It really is this fascinating mix, isn't it? You've got actual historical events,
Yep.
M-culture happened, government researched weird stuff,
Documented facts.
but then woven together with a whole lot of speculative interpretation, pattern-seeking, anecdotal
a
evidence.
huge amount of interpretation, yeah. Connecting dots that aren't necessarily connected scientifically.
And really seems to tap into some fundamental human curiosities, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Our fascination with consciousness itself, what is it? What's its potential? And the nature of reality is what we see all there is.
And if you're listening to this, it really prompts you to think about, well, how do we define what's real?
Yeah, and how much do we truly understand about our own minds? About the universe? These theories push those boundaries.
It really throws those lines into sharp focus, doesn't it? The line between what science can explain now, what people experience through maybe spirituality or mystical states,
Right.
and then just the vast realm of genuinely unexplained.
It's a blurry frontier.
So whether the OZ factor points towards actual hidden dimensions,
Yeah.
somewhere over the rainbow,
Or whether it just highlights the incredible, extraordinary capacity of our own brains to generate unique, profound, sometimes bizarre experiences.
either way, it gives you a lot to think about.
Definitely. And maybe it leaves us, and you listening, with a question. What do you make of this enduring human drive to explore the mysteries of the mind? Even when, maybe especially when, those explorations take us down these really unconventional, speculative, maybe even conspiratorial paths. What keeps pulling us towards the edges of the map?